Hi there, I'm Dr. Larry Chu, Associate Professor of Anesthesia at Stanford. And on behalf of my course co-directors, Nikita Joshi and Kyle Harrison, I want to welcome you to Medical Education in the New Millennium, a new course from the Stanford University School of Medicine. I'm extremely excited today to be beginning this new class with you. We have an exciting in-class audience of community members, of patients, of students from both engineering, computer science, and medical sciences. This is going to be a great class. I really want you to stay tuned with us. And the way that it works, we always start out each class with an Ignite talk, and we like to hear from different stakeholders. And so today it's really my pleasure to get things started by having Britt Johnson, one of our Medicine X e-patient advisory board members, start this class off with a 5-minute Ignite talk that you are going to hear out there at home after this short message from Medicine X. Welcome to Medical Education in the New Millennium, a new course from the Stanford University School of Medicine. This interdisciplinary course is produced by Stanford Medicine X and features talks from and innovators from medical education, instructional design, cognitive science, online learning, and emerging technology. Over the course of 11 weeks, we'll consider how to build educational experiences that address the unique learning preferences of today's millennial medical students and residents, address gaps in the current medical education system, and explore what might be accomplished when all healthcare stakeholders are included in the conversation. If you are joining us for the first time, a quick reminder that there's a simultaneous conversation happening on Twitter right now using the hashtag MedX. Christopher Snyder, otherwise known as I Am Spartacus, is the in-class moderator for today's program and will be taking questions from social media. So please make sure to start up your Twitter client to join in the online conversation and interact with today's speakers. Please also make sure to like our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Stanford MedX. Please note, you are watching a live online program and there is a delay between real-time events and the live stream you are watching. Tweets from our in-class guests will appear before you see the real-time events they are tweeting about unfold on the video live stream.
Medical education, or med-ed, has historically been a term owned by higher education in medicine. It is the privy knowledge of the elite few. The ability to learn about medicine has typically held great barriers, either financially, considerations of time, ability to gain admittance into the best colleges as well. But medical education is not strictly the teaching of healthcare professionals. It is the collective knowledge we all have the potential to obtain. Just as healthcare is evolving, so are our terms. And I propose a collective reimagining and redefining of all of our medical terms. Consider the term patient. Until recently, a patient was someone who had medicine done to them, or most archaically, a sufferer or a victim. But in recent years, the patient movement has redefined what it means to be a patient. We are no longer the noun or the passive definition of the patient, where the adjective, quote, quietly and steadily persevering, well, maybe not so quietly, but we are the provocation. We have expressed our annoyance with the healthcare system, humorously displayed our misfortunes, weathered the delays in our treatment, comforted each other through hardship, and shared our pain with the world. We as humans have enriched and defined the very definition of patient. As e-patient and physician Matt Dudley recently said, quote, we must remember that each patient is an N of one, end quote, and therefore we must broaden our understanding of the term. So why listen to me? Because I am a patient and I am an N of one. My experiences are not your experiences, just as your experiences are not my experiences, and we mutually have knowledge to be gained from one another. Medical education is our collective knowledge. Medical education begins the first time you stub your toe. You learn what pain is. You learn that grabbing your toe makes you feel better, that sitting for a moment allows you to catch your breath, allows your heart rate to slow, and then you also learn that that pain is only temporary. Medical education is the first time you become sick and you're old enough to realize what that means. you learn that the symptoms that you have of those itchy rashes are actually an illness, and that illness has a name, and it is called chickenpox. And you learn then that to treat that condition and to treat that illness, you stay home from school, you rest, and by all means, you do not scratch. Then you also learn that mom knows best, or dad, that mom knows comfort and compassion are an integral part of healing, and mom knows how to do all the things that the doctor did not have time to discuss with you. Dad knows that a hot, steamy shower almost always makes you feel better when you're feeling sick, and mom knows that when you have a sore throat, drinking warm Jell-O is soothing and nourishing, and maybe above all, it's a treat that makes bearing that illness just a little bit easier. So mom and dad know the importance of your teddy bear, but also your teddy bear knows the importance of snuggles. So medical education also comes from our media, though. Even Ferris Bueller knew that to get the day off, he had to fake the basics. He had passively learned for years what illness was, the symptoms that necessitated rest and staying home from school, and in his case would earn him a hooky date. Ferris Bueller's dad continued to teach him, though, even through this, and told him, wrap a hot towel around your head, a quote and form of support that I constantly hear from my husband and my father-in-law. So my intense medical education began at the age of 7, when in rapid succession I fell off my bike and cracked my skull and then came down with rheumatic fever. I quickly learned how our medical system worked and quickly began realizing how it needed to change as well. And I, like many other chronic patients, have more medical experience than most of the people in this room. And if I worked in any other profession, my collective 22 years of experience would make me an expert. Now, living with undifferentiated spondyloarthropathy, a fancy way of saying I have arthritis of the spine, rheumatoid arthritis, and Sjogren's syndrome, I understand the terms associated with my disease in an entirely different way than anybody else does. My definition will inherently be different from that of my doctor. You may learn about autoimmune arthritis symptoms in theory, but only when you emphatically listen to a patient will you have a broad understanding of the reality of these symptoms. Swelling, as learned in a classroom, will vary greatly from swelling learned by the disease process. Pain, as it is taught in books, will have mechanisms and pathways, but pain learned by a patient will be closely tied to emotion and energy and manifest in ways never taught in school. It looks like irritability, frustration, a lack of energy, and tears that should not be written off as psychosomatic symptoms. A medical and pharmacy school may teach you the chemical process of medications, but only I, the patient, can tell you how it feels emotionally and physically to take numerous pills and 2 weekly injections. And only the individual taking the medication can tell you what those side effects listed on the bottle actually feel like. Or the difficult decision that I have to make by weighing the pros and cons of taking a medication that may potentially put my disease in remission, but could also cause leukemia. So ask yourself, whose responsibility is it to share their knowledge? So sharing knowledge comes through listening to each other. It can be as passive as the medical education we learned from our parents as children, and defining medical education is ultimately a choice that we make together. It is only exclusionary if we let it be. And I know as a chronic patient, I am included in the definition of medical education because I know I have insight and learned knowledge to contribute to the greater good. And I know that my story has the ability to educate not just fellow patients, but all stakeholders in healthcare. So medical education is what we define it as. Thank you.
In 2015, Medicine X will be launching a new program called Medicine X Ed. This special conference, right before Medicine X 2015, will focus on medical education and what might be accomplished when all healthcare stakeholders can engage in a conversation about changing the culture of medicine through educational innovation. Of course, we'll discuss the role technology can play in medical education, but we'll also look at gaps in our current educational system, such as participatory medicine, shared decision-making, patient engagement, cost transparency, patient safety and reducing harm, and cross-cultural competencies. What other gaps might we address at Medicine X Ed? Let us know what you think by tweeting our hashtag MedX. And make sure to sign up online to learn more about Medicine X Ed and how you can get involved.
I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our course professors today. So we have Dr. Larry Chu. He's an associate professor of anesthesia on the faculty of the Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Chu studies how information technologies can be used to improve medical education and collaborates with researchers in simulation and computer science at Stanford to study how cognitive aids can improve healthcare outcomes. He is the executive director of Stanford MedX. And we also have Dr. Kyle Harrison over here. He is a founding core faculty member of the AIM Lab, a clinical assistant professor at the Palo Alto Veterans Affairs Hospital. Dr. Harrison is a graduate of Stanford's simulation program, and he is an associate program director of Stanford's anesthesia residency program and specializes in ACLS, emergency medical checklists, and the use of educational technologies. Nikita Joshi is currently a clinical instructor at Stanford University, Division of Emergency Medicine. She completed her emergency medicine residency at SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn, New York, and she is also an associate editor of the blog Academic Life in Emergency. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Chu now.
All right, thanks so much, Britt. Okay, so hi there. I'm Larry Chu, associate professor. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. So hi there, I'm Larry Chu, Associate Professor of Anesthesia at Stanford and Executive Director of Medicine X. On behalf of my course co-directors, Kyle Harrison and Nikita Joshi, welcome to Medical Education in the New Millennium, a new course from the Stanford University School of Medicine that aims to examine the future of medical education in a networked, connected, patient, and learner-centered world. Over the next 11 weeks, we'll consider how to build educational experiences that address the unique learning preferences and needs of today's millennial learners. Let me start out by posing a few questions. As the volume of new medical knowledge outpaces our ability to organize and retain it, how might educators disrupt outdated practices through thoughtful use of technology and learning design? How might some of these technologies, like MOOCs, massive open online courses, social media, simulation, virtual reality, change the face of medical education? How might we make learning continuous, engaging, and scalable in the age of increasing demands and limited work hours? Joining us in the conversation will be experts from all healthcare education stakeholder domains. We've invited patients and students from nursing, medicine, and the engineering sciences to be part of this course. Since this is our first class, Kyle and Nikita and I decided that each of us today would give you one key takeaway to reflect what we personally are most excited about for you to take away from this course. So here's mine. How might we reframe a discussion about medical education as a conversation for everyone? This is a tweet from Morgan Gleason. She is a 16-year-old who suffers from juvenile myositis, an autoimmune disorder. She came to speak at Stanford Medicine X this year, and one of our e-patients in the audience, Marie Ennis O'Connor, captured one of Morgan's comments in the form of this tweet. And it's, quote, "You send doctors to med school, you don't send patients to patient school." So I thought this was a very insightful comment, and I think it points out one of the things that we can do better in medical education, which is to include everyone in medical education, including patients who want and need to learn more about their conditions and how they can be partners along with doctors in their care. Morgan's comment is also a great opportunity for me to briefly mention how we educate doctors in the US. That process begins with 4 years of college. That includes core science pre-medical courses, 4 years of medical school, leading to an MD or DO, a medical doctor degree. But the training doesn't end there. It continues with 1 year of internship medical training, followed by anywhere from 2 to 8 or more years of postgraduate medical training. The medical training process for physicians has only increased over time, and the average age of newly minted physicians entering practice in the US is increasing. Since 1975, the percentage of physicians who are younger than 35 has dropped from 28% to 15% of physicians. So now that I've mentioned briefly how we educate doctors in the US, what happens when they enter practice? At Medicine X, we often speak about the concept of participatory medicine and the notion that patients need to be valued, engaged members of the healthcare team. We believe, and evidence shows, that healthcare outcomes improve when the entire team, including patients, works together in a participatory practice of medicine. So I've stolen this slide from Dr. Harrison. Sorry, Kyle. I added some of my own comments to it. But it reflects that many of us in medicine and healthcare share these values of participatory medicine and shared decision-making and teamwork in medicine. We show just a few of the members of the healthcare team in this slide, but that includes doctors and nurses and patients. And as my pharmacist colleague, Dr. Kevin Clausen, frequently reminds me, the most accessible healthcare professional to patients, pharmacists. But please do include in this slide educators and all healthcare stakeholders. So, if the practice of participatory medicine requires a team effort, could we think of medical education in the same way? Let me pose a few more questions for you to consider as you take this course. How might doctors, nurses, patients, pharmacists, and all healthcare stakeholders engage in education together in ways that increase not just patient engagement, but team engagement? How might all stakeholders break free from their silos and learn from each other and the unique talents and insights they each bring to medical education? How might those outside of the field of medical education, including engineering, designers, computer science, education, help innovate and transform the way we educate all healthcare stakeholders, including those who work in the medical professions? These are just a few of the topics that we're going to explore in this class. Let me run by just a few of the speakers that you'll be fortunate enough to hear in this class. In this course, we're going to hear from Stanford Education Professor Dan Schwartz, who will provide a great introduction to understand how humans think and learn, and how we might use that knowledge as a framework for learning design and thoughtful use of technology in education. Speaking in that session will also be Stanford Emergency Medicine resident Andrew Phillips. We're also fortunate to have Dr. Brian Vardabedian and Kirsten Oster from the Medical Futures Lab at Rice University join us for this course. They will share with us their work on bringing the patient voice to medical education. Duke nursing student Anna Clemenson and e-patient Ryan Pryor will also lend their voices and share their stories in that session. We'll also hear from Charles Prober, our Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education at Stanford, and he is doing very important work on a national level in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to really reimagine undergraduate medical education in the United States. Lynn Nye, a medical student from University of Southern California, will also speak at that session and moderate it. And the last speaker that I'm going to mention is Christine Park. She's Director of Simulation at Northwestern University. She'll share with us the use of experiential learning in medical education and the role simulation and part-task training can play in putting knowledge into practice. Andrew Stanley, who's a student from the Charm Lab at Stanford, will join us as a speaker and moderator of that session. So thank you so much for allowing me to give you just a very brief overview of some of the highlights of this new course from Stanford University. In order to keep my comments brief, I haven't really highlighted a lot of the work that our own AIM lab does and is doing for education at Stanford. So I invite you to learn more about us at aim.stanford.edu. Thanks so much. I'm going to hand it over to Kyle.
Great. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. We're going to switch slide decks and I'll get started here. So when Larry and Nikki and I were brainstorming about this course and thinking about where we wanted to head with this endeavor, one of the things that we talked about was how should medical education change? And then we actually said, well, it's more important to talk about how healthcare delivery should change, because that should be the primary driver. So that is actually what we're here. We don't go to med school or nursing school or pharmacy school to learn about interesting facts. We go to learn how to help people. So if we can't actually do that well, because of all the barriers and all the issues that come up in the delivery of care, then we're failing as clinicians. So how should we change? The first thing, this is what I really wanted to focus on in the approach to medical education in Millennium, is the first, do no harm. It's the thing that's been carried down since then the Greeks. And unfortunately, we're not doing much better because we still harm a lot of people in the care of patients. So let me tell you kind of a little story. So imagine you have a loved one who came in for elective surgery, was prescribed a blood thinner to try and prevent a preventable complication of blood clot. Instead of having the appropriate dose, he received a 100-fold overdose of that blood thinner. The patient begins to have massive amounts of bleeding. And then the nurses call for help. A team of physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, pharmacists assemble together to try and help care for this patient. And what should be a well-oiled machine, because almost like a pit crew, so that every second counts. Instead, the group of people, although they're well-meaning, they don't know each other. They don't work together. They don't even know each other's roles. They don't know the strengths and weaknesses of the group. They try and do their best. They assemble. They work hard. Errors occur. Treatment steps are missed. Protocols are violated. Your loved one has a full cardiac arrest because the blood loss is so much. They continue to struggle. Patient is saved, goes to the ICU, spends 3 weeks, finally goes home a month later. They're the lucky ones because they lived. They weren't killed by the medical system, which unfortunately we do quite a bit of. In 1999, the Institute of Medicine published this landmark paper, To Err is Human, and they reported that anywhere from 44 to 98,000 deaths a year occur from preventable medical error. That calculates out to 120 to 260 deaths a day. That's a lot of people that we're killing. This is pure error resulting in patients' deaths. Some people have argued that this was methodologically erred and there were different issues with it. Recent work has come out more recently in the Journal of Patient Safety, a meta-analysis that showed those numbers are actually probably underrepresenting our damage to patients. Reporting as high as 400,000 deaths a year. That's almost 1,200 patients a day that are dying when we try and provide care to our patients. To put that in context, the worst aviation disaster in the history of aviation occurred in the Canary Islands, where 2 fully loaded 747s crashed into each other, killing 583 people. That landmark event changed the way aviation safety is delivered. We're killing twice this many every day and nothing changes. So why is that? One of the key components, let me go back to this, so put it in references to cause of death in the US. This is the leading cause of death from 2013 from CDC. Mostly heart disease, cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, accidents, and stroke. If we were to take the numbers of preventable medical errors and put it in this context, it would be the 3rd leading cause of death. We learn about heart disease and strokes and diabetes, everything. We don't learn about how not to kill our patients. Yet it's one of the leading causes of death. Why? One of the big reasons is that healthcare education, delivery, it's all siloed. Physicians go enter their training, they work together, nurses, patients, pharmacists, healthcare administrators, everyone works in a siloed condition. Your culture is created around your own profession. You don't understand the way we communicate across professions. It results in lots of preventable harm. So is there a future state where we can break through these silos? Well, this is, kind of where I envision if we all head in and then work together and let the medical educational system fuse us all together, educate us all at the same level, at least at some level, so that we can learn at least how to communicate effectively together to try and prevent such errors from occurring in the future. That's why I'm quite excited about some of the lectures that are coming. I'm quite excited about all the lectures, but some of them are particularly focused on a patient safety approach. And I want you to focus on the course, and every lecture you hear, I want you to think, how could this help prevent preventable medical errors? Because it is an important thing that we need to focus on. So just to highlight 3 ones, Larry's already talking about Christine Park. Medical simulation is something that's dear and dear to my heart. It's one of my academic focuses. She's going to come give us a talk on that. Patient safety, cognitive bias, and medical training. Experts Marjorie Stiegler and Lauren Riskin are they going to come and speak about that. And then we're going to talk about how cross-cultural care and medical education and how to speak against authority gradients. How do you speak up when you see something going wrong? And these are all, I think, crucial things in order to provide better care for our patients. And if you notice, the one other thing is, as Larry said, participatory medicine. Patients need to be involved in their own safety. They're the best advocates to make sure that harm does not occur to themselves. So I'm going to hand it over to Nikita, and she's going to go over her side.
Thank you. All right, so I'm Nikita Joshi, clinical instructor in emergency medicine, and I'm really glad to be here to speak with all of you. I'm glad that you all have come here to be here, primarily because I want to talk a little bit of a different side of this course that's really near and dear to my heart, which is what the creative class in medicine is doing now. So Dr. V, who is one of the speakers, who we've already mentioned a few times now, has his own blog, and in August he posted out something about the creative class in medicine. And he titled it, "Are We Witnessing the Rise of a Creative Class in Medicine?" The creative class is a term that was coined by Richard Florida, and it is a term to describe those people who were critical in the post-industrial development in cities. And so what Dr. V is, he took that term and he applied it to what's going on in medical education. There's a change that's happening right now in medical education, and there's a core group of people, this creative class that he termed them, that's shaping and revolutionizing the way that we're all being educated. This fantastic quote from his post said, "The creative class in medicine is facilitated by the democratized tools for writing, recording, photographing, making, and publishing." And so what a lot of people now in medical education are doing, they're taking the power, the tools of the internet, and they're using it to create educational content that's being put out there onto the internet. And these tools are following the foundations of democracy. They're free, they're open, they're available, they're accessible by anyone at any time, in any place. We're free. They're writing blog posts. These posts are sometimes opinion pieces. Sometimes these posts are opinion pieces on guidelines that have just come out. Sometimes these are summaries of core content that's available for free. They're recording podcasts, discussions, journal clubs that are also available, no longer behind a firewall in an institution, but actually available and out there for people not only to listen to, but also to engage and participate themselves. They're photographing important findings, putting it out onto the internet so that information, no matter how minor or small to be found in a patient population, can actually be put out there onto the internet so someone can find out these rare diseases. They're making and they're publishing. Most of all, they're creating. So who is the creative class in medicine? I think the answer is pretty obvious. The people that we have coming to this course make up the creative class in medicine. Particularly 3 that I wanted to mention that really align in terms of topic with something that I'm really proud of, which is using the internet to create educational content. And the first one is Anne-Marie Cunningham, who's from Cardiff University. She's the academic lead for e-learning there. The second one is Daphne Kohler, who is the president of Coursera. She is from Stanford University, currently focusing on Coursera, which is working with MOOCs. And finally, Renata Fuscher, who's Senior Research Engineer for Collaboration Technologies and Founding Director of PBLs. So why are we doing all of this? What is actually wrong with medicine that we now need an entire creative class to revolutionize it? So Dr. Prober, who is also speaking with us, has an article that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine 2012, and he quotes says, "It is time to change the way we educate doctors." So everyone has seen pictures like this, an old lecture hall. Usually the pictures are black and white, sepia, grainy, but this is actually a picture that I could have taken myself today in any lecture hall and applied a filter. This is how, especially in the preclinical years, we are educating those who want to go into the medical profession. There's one person speaking, an entire group of people listening, and there is no engagement. There's no two-way interaction, and most of all, there are no patients in there. But even beyond not having any patients, there's no interdisciplinary aspect to these for the most part. We read these books, and now these books are usually available in an e-format, so they aren't as heavy and dusty looking, but really a lot of times this content still comes from the same kind of background as this. There has been a push to incorporate bedside learning, and William Osler, who is one of the basic advocates for this, would be happy with this photo. We have a patient in this photo. We have someone who looks like the doctor, and we have people who look like they're learning. But what is actually true about this photo and wrong with everything that's in the medical system is the level of engagement. You have the patient in the center of the photo, but no one is really looking at that patient. You have the doctor who's looking at the learners. The learners don't actually at one point have their back almost turned to the patient. And this is not what we want in our medical education. On the surface, sure, we've moved away from the lecture hall. We're at the bedside, but really this is no better than the lecture hall. What we want for now is medical education in the new millennium. We want to be able to create material that's available on the internet for free and accessible by anyone. And we want to use this not just to educate the professionals, but also to help educate the patients. And in turn, have the patients use this to educate the professionals. It has to be a round table. Everyone's standing at the same level. No one is sitting or standing or, vice versa. Everyone can be eye contact and engage together fully. Sometimes the content can even look as simple as a crayon drawing, but it doesn't matter what it looks like as long as it's there and can put across that educational content. So what exactly is so special about this content that's put out there? The biggest part of this and why it's different than e-learning as what has been typically learned is that this content that's being put out there is collaborative. The creator and the end user are now able to talk together. The end user, if they find something wrong with the content that's been made, can actually give immediate feedback to the creator and change things real time. Everything that is created is open access. If a blog post is posted, and if there's something wrong with that post, we can put in the comment section what we think is wrong. We can put the citations, and it's available for everyone to read. There are no firewalls. There are no institutional fees. There is no hierarchy of a patient not being able to access this material. It's all there. And most of all, again, going back to that word, it's collaborative. The model for medical education is changing. The emergence of technologies presents opportunity to reimagine the future of medical education. And so that's why we're here today. We want to reimagine, now that we have these technologies, simulation, online modules, MOOCs, how can we use that to reimagine the future of medical education that's collaborative, that is inclusive? So in conclusion, another quote by Dr. Prober, why would anyone waste precious lecture time on a lecture when we have so much more available to us online? So now I'm going to turn it over. Thank you, Britt.
We're going to get started with our Q&A. Okay, so we'll get going with a Q&A here. So I want to start with any questions in the class for anybody up here. Don't be shy. Otherwise, I'm going to jump to some of the Post-it notes. Okay, here. I'm going to hand you the mic real quick just so we can hear, everybody can hear your question at home.
Great introductions, first of all. Dr. Harrison mentioned about flight simulated education. Do you think the future of medical education will lead to classroom, online, or any technical simulated education? And of course, the face-to-face experience. A good example is like in flight, the flight simulated education. There's crisis management simulation. I think that's really important for alleviating the medical error or the experience, how to deal with crises.
Absolutely. In fact, do I need a mic or just keep fine?
You're good.
So, great point. In fact, in the basement of this building, we have a simulation center. I spent all day down there today training anesthesia residents in the exact same thing you mentioned, anesthesia crisis resource management. Started here at Stanford with our colleague Dave Gaba. It's very important that we train to manage these crises similar to the way aviation does. There's a lot of parallels between healthcare and aviation. One of the big differences is that we don't get to pick the plane. We've got to take off with 3 engines down, the oil light not working, because you've got to treat the patients that come to you. But there's still a lot of things we can do to maximize that safety, and simulation is one of them. Effective communication is one. All very good points. But we're going to actually have a talk later in the course specifically about medical education using medical simulation. And I'm biased because that's what I work in, but I think that is kind of one of the ways we can really help move the safety frontiers forward.
I have 2 questions and comments about the new paradigms and how we learn online. The first is that people tend to believe whatever they read. And I've experienced a lot of patients coming to me with what I see as misconceptions that they've gleaned from internet sites. So how we deal with that is an interesting question. The other is that in education, I think having a dialogue back and forth with an educator that has a broad sense of expertise in an area is very helpful and actually crucial at certain levels of learning. I have several daughters in college, and they do online courses and in-person courses. And the online courses where they don't have access in a ready manner to an instructor who can help them interpret the language that they may not understand completely becomes a real barrier. What are your thoughts on those 2 issues?
From my perspective, I think the evolving role of doctors is going to be one of guides for our patients. And Amy Tendrit from Diabetes Mind makes this great analogy of, for her, healthcare is like going to do her taxes once a year with her accountant. And they give her great advice, but for the rest of the year, she needs to balance her checkbook herself. So in the same way, I think part of our new evolving role as doctors is to try to be partners and guides for our patients. And part of that is going to be helping them to navigate sources of information. I think it's incumbent on us as well as physicians to know what are the leading peer-to-peer communities out there for the disease conditions that we treat. If I'm an oncologist, I need to know about ACOG, and I need to know that that's a resource I can send my patients to. And at the same way, one could argue that there might be some responsibility for those who want to do it to be on social media, to lend our voice, especially when we have discussions about vaccines and autism. And we need to have that physician voice on social media as well. We all need to be part of the conversation. But Nikita, do you have something to also comment on?
I do. I think that just like we teach professionals themselves to always look at literature with a critical eye, I think the best example of recent times is the Tamiflu research that had been published. There have been so many papers that said that Tamiflu works for the flu. and then come to find out that that research was actually extremely flawed, data was misinterpreted. So what had been published in journals that not only were respected but world renowned turned out to not be true. The same way, anybody who reads anything on the internet needs to know how to read it with a critical eye and needs to know how to do that practically. Always look to see who's the author, when was it published, are there options to provide comments onto that site? And I think that those basic things will let you know, is this site credible? There are a lot of sites that perhaps traditionally doctors would not be considered to be credible. For example, a lot of forums that are discussions. Forums by discussion are inherently not evidence-based medicine, but it's actually a great way for people to develop a community and to discuss. So that's a good example of something that traditionally would not be considered as so rigorous in terms of the academic side, but so important for those who are trying to get a voice out there. We have to acknowledge that patients are doing this and give an opportunity to have them feel comfortable sharing it with the doctors that they are reading these things and to address concerns that come up with that. And then to address your second part, I think that there is a big and growing divide between what is e-learning, what has traditionally been put onto the computer and internet for people to access, and what is now being created with social media, blog posts, podcasts, and the key difference comes down to the interaction level. Good quality information must allow for there to be interaction between learner and instructor.
So I have a follow-up question there. And this could go to any one of you. As providers, would you ever suggest that your patients go to a patient blog or a patient-generated site, since you listed credible sources? And then maybe what do we need to do to make those credible sources?
You have to step closer.
Sorry.
We have to be together.
Got it.
You're separating the patient from the doctors.
I'll jump over here.
Who wants to take that one on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, once again, if we go back and say we want to do healthcare delivery, not medicine, support is a key component of getting people healthier and weller. And so, that's something that you may be able to give support. And there are people who, you talked about your experience. Well, across the big data internet, there are many people that may have your experience. There's not only your experience, but it's more than experience I've had with condition X or Y. So I think it's an absolute great resource. Following up on Anita's comment, it's like before we always kept all the knowledge. We would learn the knowledge in medicine and nursing school and et cetera, and the patients never got to be on the inside. With the internet, now they get to see, even though I always say Google is the world's worst medical school because you don't have the context, right? So we need to train people to be able to be the contextual filter for patients to say, okay, this is correct, but maybe let's frame it in a different way so you understand how it fits in your life. Because there is some stuff that's not appropriate and not consistent, but there's a lot of good stuff as well.
And I will just add, I think part of this course and having this conversation is to raise awareness to everyone, including those of us in the medical professions and who are medical educators, the role that peer-to-peer healthcare and patient communities can have in education. And there are some very powerful communities out there where patients can go and not only get support, I would say also get important practical information about their own conditions. Your doctor may not know how to tell you how to transfer your elderly parent who's bedridden and you need to take care of them. And there are patients out there who've engineered very ingenious solutions to these problems. Susanna Fox mentions this story and talks about a woman who was a baker and used the bread paddle for the oven that bakes the bread to help her get leverage to help her take care of moving her parents. So these are things we don't learn in medical school. There is expertise that patients have developed over the years. As Nikita said, they might not be published in the New England Journal of Medicine, but I think it's important for us as physicians to be aware of these communities and what they might be able to offer. I see John there with a question, so.
Can I maybe pass that back? Thank you.
Thank you. So to extend kind of the metaphor of doctors, healthcare advisors, you would CPAs, financial advisor, two clear challenges come to mind. One, the vocabulary challenge. I think anyone who's been to med school will remember that the first year is basically a foreign language class. And two is the risk incurred by providing advice on these non-credential resources. What do y'all see as the challenge? We can't rewrite up to date to be in layman's terms. There's too much out there to work on. So what do y'all see as the primary goals in getting patients at least a little better up to speed on the Greek that we literally speak?
I mean, I hate to hog the conversation, but I will say I think part of that transformation is going to come from places like Medicine X. We are working on a whole new series of courses. They are online, but they are designed to provide the patient school that Morgan Gleason asked for, to help share some of the language of what it is to be in healthcare. Who are the members of your healthcare team? What is a resident? What is an attending? Of course, when we go to medical school, we're learning different things than what we would expect patients to learn. But in the same way that we learn certain vocabulary to be doctors, in some ways I would challenge us to learn the vocabulary to speak to patients. Speak with patients, not to patients. Speak with patients and understand, even in our own minds, how we can reduce that jargon, right? That's, again, not something we learn in medical school.
I think,
all right.
if I may add a
Go
point
ahead.
also, I think the key also is to remember that we are a team with our patient. And I don't know if every patient can be told to go off to the internet, here are some keywords to Google, see you later. I think rather we need to realize that our healthcare systems should be homes for patients, and these homes should include the pharmacist and the social worker and other disciplines who work with patients to not only help them learn about their own disease process, but in different facets of it. So, for example, being able to safely navigate your home is not a traditional medical topic, but very important for the health of the patient. So it's not just alone enough to have and encourage your patients to use the internet, but to use really the healthcare system as a totality.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's great. I'll come to you in just a moment. So I want to follow up just a question for our class here from what Larry said. How many of you are familiar with the sort of cross-disease term SPOONY? Ooh, only a couple. So that's going to, well, our patient in the back, yes. So I'm going to challenge all of you to go home and Google that and see what you learn there. And that applies to all diseases. So I'm not going to...
SPOONY.
SPOONY.
SPOONIE.
Yes. So
SPOONY.
search that hashtag as well. Just real quick, I want to remind everybody watching at home that if you have any questions, go ahead and tweet them at Stanford MedX. You can also use the hashtag MedX. I want to just give a couple shout outs. Actually, we have Amy Gleason, Morgan's mom, watching. Yeah. And we have a couple of our e-patients from this year, e-patient scholars. And Matt at Matt BC as well as at Courage Sings, at Rumor Has It, and at Room of Her Own. So some very creative handles in there. So I'm going to come over here for the question that we have.
Thanks. I have a couple of comments. If I could have my wish come true for everyone, I would get rid of the word patient. It has such a really negative connotation. I think it's more like you're a medical client, and that changes the way I think people respond to each other. There's still the white coat syndrome. There's still the over-respect that while it's true that you want to respect your doctor, I think that doctors, to most patients, are over-respected before they prove their worth. And it's not like going to a CPA. You don't have the same, I don't get the same kind of charge going to a CPA that people feel about their doctors, so it's very hard to question. And I'd love to see that change. I don't know if that's possible, but I think that the feeling about it and the thought behind it is really critical from a patient point of view. The other thing that I have found, unfortunately, in the last year is that there is a real protection of things that go wrong with many medical practitioners. They're very concerned about protecting people who have made errors or perhaps speaking against hospitals, for example. So there's a lot of involvement of many layers in the real world. And I'm so delighted that you all are having this kind of educational opportunity for new physicians, primarily, who are coming on board. I'd love to get your feedback on how we can educate patients, not necessarily sending them to get educated in the meat of the terminology, but in the attitude of being a peer to their physician, and also how to educate the physicians who have been out there for a long time, aside from giving some of them a good swift kick. It's really important, I think, to bring them in, because I think that the younger generation is going to be a whole lot smarter about so many things than what may be going on right now. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great assignment for our MOOC, and I'm going to ask Nicole to write that down. I think one of the activities we need to ask our online students, and maybe you can come back next week and give me your ideas too. How might we come up with a different name for patient? What might that be? What might that word be? You know, so I think that's number one. I think that's a great insight. And number two, the other thing I love what you said is that we are here to learn from you as well. This is not a one-way. This is not a one-way process. We need to learn from everyone in this room. And why do we do the MOOC and the live stream? Because we want to learn from everyone out there as well. And I think that's part of the culture change. Joe, in the beginning of class, we were doing little Post-it notes about the challenges for medical education. And one of the things that Joe said was transforming cultures. And I think that is what our discussion is today. That is what this class is about. So thank you for that.
And if I may add another point, what you want is transparency in the healthcare delivery, which is absolutely what you want. And part of what we want in this course is also transparency in that medical education that happens. And so you talk about the different generations, and so this new generation is learning in a new way. And part of it is, from the very beginning, being comfortable with questioning the sources of the material that you're being taught to learn, which will allow you to at least know that it's okay to question and challenge. Therefore, later, when there is an ethical dilemma or some sort of a situation that comes up, at least that thought of being able to question and speak up is already inherently there from the beginning.
So I'm going to take a question from Twitter really quick. This comes from another one of our e-patients, Carly. I think it's a good one. Sometimes the patient is the one bringing the doctor up to speed, often when they have something so specialized, and that can even be the specialist that deals in that. So how do we facilitate both learning on both sides there? It's a good question.
Well, I'll tell you what I do. And this is actually how I've changed my practice. And actually, I'm surprised because it actually makes some people uncomfortable. But for the first 30 seconds after I sit down with a patient, I listen. I actually listen. And some people are uncomfortable because what's wrong with this doctor? It's been more than 18 seconds and he hasn't interrupted me. But I listen. And I think that's a small thing that could lead to big things. So I think my one thing is we need to start that dialogue of respecting the patient and the expertise that they have in their own condition, is to listen. What is their story that they're telling you?
So one of the things a phenomenon that usually accompanies the democratization of information is the proliferation of information. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to what you see as necessary elements for good discovery tools, and also how to disseminate good discovery tools beyond research institutions down to the general practitioner out in the community.
That's a big issue that is happening, and it's now led to the proliferation of tools for curation, which is what you're speaking of. So practically speaking, there are RSS feeds, which a person can program themselves based on the specific areas that they have interest in, to look at post, podcasts related to that topic. The other thing that I can recommend is that there are a lot of blogs that have taken upon themselves to curate the material that comes out and to send that out almost as a newsletter format. But the curation is not just enough to go through and sort by topic. You have to know that what you're reading and listening to is of value and educationally sound. And that is where social media is fantastic, but the future will allow for educators to know how to curate these sources and present it to their learners. So while social media is great for asynchronous and adult learners, it will never replace the actual educator that needs to be in there stepping in to say that this is educationally sound content.
I think we're also seeing the development of more user-obvious tools to navigate large data sets. The example I'll give is Charles Ornstein's work from ProPublica, where ProPublica has developed a series of tools that allow patients to navigate the Medicare billing data and other quality data from individual physicians to help make some informed decisions about how to choose a doctor, how to find a good one. So as we get more data, as you mentioned, Medicare just released tons of data about every physician in the United States and how we practice. We need to develop these user-obvious tools to allow people to navigate and make sense of it all. So hopefully folks like ProPublica, and I'm sure some smart people at Google, they'll figure it out, right?
I'll follow up on the clinician side. I know my own approach to continuing medical education, in addition to going to conferences, I follow several different Twitter people who, echo is one of the areas I'm interested in, and I get all kinds of stuff. And it's, I've got 3 seconds. I look at my Twitter feed and I learn something new, a little nugget of information. So sometimes I go out and seek information. Sometimes information just pops in my Twitter account. I learn something because I'm, oh, that's cool. And that's a way that you can continue your ongoing education because I'm following people that are generating useful information for me to maintain proficiency.
We have another question from the class here.
Hi, so I think that one of the problems with medical care delivery is that a lot of times it's looked at as a commodity comparable to any other transaction. So do you think that with the changing healthcare system, this perception is going to change, or there's going to be some sort of change in medical education?
I think your question, it's a complicated question, but I know that on an individual basis, I feel that it would be very rare for a healthcare professional to actually be influenced by this and to look at their patient. They're in the room with them. It's them one-on-one, and to look at them as a commodity. That's just not something that happens when you're looking at someone as a person. And so if anything, the only change that would be is to drive more into medical education, the reminder of the patient as a person, and whatever term that as a collective we decide to give beyond just a patient themselves.
I'm very bad at quotes, but I think it's Sinclair Lewis, but it's very hard to get people, I think I'm paraphrasing, but to get someone to believe something that goes against their economic self-interest. So naturally, if you're going into a healthcare delivery profession, you still got to pay the bills, right? I mean, you still need to make a living. So there's always going to be that tension about, am I competing against another profession in order to maintain my job so I can pay the bills and live. So that's a good point, that we need to always be aware of that tension and find out the sweet spot.
And I'll take almost a daringly contrarian view, which is maybe we don't think of healthcare as a commodity enough in terms of, okay, don't stone me yet, but in terms of understanding cost transparency, understanding the fact that technically a CT scan is a CT scan, and why does that cost vary so much between hospitals? If we looked at healthcare as a commodity, maybe we would have more consistency in the cost of things. And why is that important? Is there an individual responsibility for being stewards of the limited healthcare resources that we have, even if in our insurance system and the way things go, we're not paying out of our own pocket, but as physicians and patients and users of the system, do we have a responsibility to want to think about the parts of healthcare that are commodities and how we can understand that cost and have that transparent throughout the system?
And would that allow then patients to make better educated choices as well? I would
Absolutely.
say, because then we know, what may be medically necessary or not. Because I've recently made definitely decisions based on costs. Is this absolutely necessary? Is there a step that we can take first, even if that means a week or two? But that next test could mean my next paycheck as well. So I think it allows better teamwork there as well. So.
Cost and harm to the patient as well.
And let's not even begin to talk about the price of medications, right? and how, as doctors, we prescribe medications that if we don't know how much they cost, we don't even know that the prescription we're writing doesn't do our patient any good, because they're not going to be able to afford that anyways.
And then I would argue that the stress of trying to pay for that medication then would exacerbate symptoms and would exacerbate the disease. So that's something to consider there, is, are you actually making the disease worse via stress by prescribing that? So there's a lot tied in there. I think we had a new question over here. No? Okay, I'll come back over here.
This is just a bit of a comment, but one of the most exciting things I've read recently was an article about a family who had a child with an extremely rare condition that couldn't be diagnosed. And using some of these millennial tools, they connected with other people. I think there's maybe 6 cases of this in the world. They actually connected with them and began the steps to create research to find treatments and cures. And they connected with people all over the world. It was an amazing, amazing article. And so I think that patients are not only going to be educating us and themselves, but they're going to be creating the new research to approach the cures for their own conditions by leveraging these tools.
The best thing about all of this is that it transcends time barriers, geographical barriers, financial barriers, and so you can reach someone in a very remote area in ways that never was possible before.
So I'm going to combine a couple questions on Twitter that we got. So we'll go there real quick. This comes from at Room of Her Own. She asked, do the physicians here notice resistance among other physicians to create change? And are they wanting change? And kind of similarly, Courage Sings asks us, how do we make this work, this new idea? So I think those are kind of tied together. When the doctor knows best environment is kind of the norm right now, and being questioned and how do we get them to accept being questioned? So how do we look at that?
I think that the way we change a culture is through continuous and persistent daily efforts. And I think another way we change it is to have a conversation earlier in the process. So let's talk about some of these issues of entrenched thinking that hold us back from innovation. Not when you're one of our newly minted physicians entering the workforce. Let's talk about it earlier in medical school, or maybe even earlier in high school, or even earlier. But the idea is, the change of a culture doesn't happen overnight, but it won't happen at all if we don't make that continuous, persistent effort. I think how we do it is we need to do.
Less talk, more doing.
We need to do it. We need to do it.
So do we have any more questions? One more. Okay, this is going to be our last question this evening.
It's a lot of pressure. So my question relates to the rise of sort of wearable technology and the proliferation of medical data. So it's really a 2-part question. One, what role do you see that playing in education, medical education in the new millennium? And then secondly, what role how can we better educate patients to do things with that data, so that they can be better partners with these awesome tools that are becoming available?
I think one aspect of the wearable technology is what you can do with the data, and I think gamification is a fantastic thing to do with that data. Every day you set a daily goal of X number of steps that you want to walk. You meet that goal and you get a badge. And we all like games, and it's not just for the little kids, and they've shown this and they have research to support this. You have a badge, it shows up on your social media site, you can share that amongst your community. You can have competitions amongst your coworkers, and what does that end up doing? It just gets people out there walking more. And the same thing can happen with blood pressure data or finger stick glucoses. So that's just one kind of aspect of one way of going about it.
And the wearable is not even just for patients. They're a very low tech thing that they showed, a little thing you wear on your belt. It buzzes every, I can't remember, 5-10 minutes, and you alcohol your hands, and it was able to reduce surgical site infections in hospitals. So, wearability and technology can be pretty low tech and still be effective.
I'll also point you to an article that Rob Pearl, CEO of Kaiser Permanente, wrote that summarized a talk that he gave at Medicine X this year, where he really tried to explore why it is that mobile health and wearables actually aren't making the impact and traction that they currently are. He explains it much better than I will. So I will put that link on the MOOC, and we'll also send an email out to folks. But I think one of the things to keep in mind also, to turn your question around, is how might we help create wearables that solve problems that actually matter to patients? I think oftentimes what we see are, here's this gadget, and it does this, and now you go figure out what to do with it or why it's important to you. So I think part of that process of making things more useful is, again, going back to this idea of patient-centered design, co-creation with patients, working on problems that actually matter to people. It sounds pretty basic, but we just don't see enough of it. In the wearables market, in the devices, or even in learning design and the use of technology in education. We don't see enough of that.
Well, you absolutely read my mind there, Dr. Chu. So what I was going to say to that, to follow up, is that if the data is not relevant to patients, then and it's not going to immediately impact, and it's going to be more of a burden, we're not going to take that on. So it's finding the simplistic way to incorporate that into our lives. How do we simplistically make that meaningful to our health and managing our own diseases? So I would challenge that same thinking the same way as Dr. Chu, is that if it's meaningful to the patient and it works for the patient, then we'll take it on no matter the process, the gamification, anything along those lines. So do you guys have any follow-ups before we wrap up? So
I think we're just about
all right.
on time.
We went a few minutes over, so thank you for bearing with us. But I want to thank all of you guys for coming to the first of our course this semester. And we will see you guys next time. So thank you so much.
If you like what you see in this class, be sure to check out our online course, Engage and Empower Me, a new online class from the Stanford University School of Medicine. We are featuring presentations from patients and experts on participatory medicine. Through this course, we hope to empower you to take part in creating a more inclusive and collaborative healthcare system. The course can be found at class.stanford.edu. As a reminder, this program is made possible by support from the Stanford University School of Medicine, Department of Anesthesia, Stanford AIM Lab, Stanford Hospital and Clinics, and the Agency for Healthcare Research Quality. If you haven't yet done so, please take a moment to like our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Stanford MedX so you can continue the conversation online and stay informed of program updates. From all of us here at Stanford Medicine X, we want to thank you for joining us today and remind you to join us again next Thursday, October 2nd at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for another edition of Stanford Medicine X Live, featuring a new class on medical education from the Stanford University School of Medicine called Medical Education in the New Millennium. Next week, we are featuring Stanford Professor of Education, Dan Schwartz. For all of you out there taking time to tune in with us tonight, thank you for joining us and being part of the conversation. A special thanks to our guest panelists this evening. From all of us at Stanford Medicine X, we'll see you next time.